So from a preparation perspective, I mean, this is why we're here, right? We want to establish a plan, establish policies in place, and make sure that you have buy-in at the top. You want to ensure that the C-level execs are all on board with your incident response plan. You also want to be doing continuous collection analysis of threat intelligence. You want to be engaging in cyber threat hunting operations. One thing we never did was wait for an incident come to us. We went out and found our incidents. That's the last thing you want to do. So it's always good to be more proactive than reactive from an IR perspective. You want to conduct operational cyber exercises, so testing your plan. You want to ensure vulnerability management and configuration management are well informed, and you want to document any procedures for incident handling. So as you collect evidence and data, what are the appropriate protocols as you're going through that process? So detection and reporting. Monitoring and the correlation of security events to detect and alert to report on a security incident. I can't stress this enough. In order to be effective from an incident response perspective and even able to determine whether or not you have an incident, it's important to centralize all the logs that you can within your environment. So having a centralized SIM that ingests your intrusion prevention system logs, your antivirus logs, firewall logs, all of that is critical in order to build a picture of what's going on within your environment. Because then you'll have the ability to search across all your devices to identify when something malicious has occurred. And you'll be able to trace back and go through, what was that story being told of how that threat actor got in, what boxes did they touch, what firewalls did they go through, or what data leak prevention logs may have they generated when they were on the system. So having a centralized SIM is highly recommended from a threat perspective. Antivirus logs, a lot of times customers, they'll rely upon their AV agent to do its job. It's essentially eradicate malware, right? But it's not always effective. A lot of times, antivirus might only pick up 10 to 15% of malware these days. So from an antivirus log perspective, there's still key elements of data within those logs that might indicate you have a problem. One good example is when a threat actor gets into an environment, they might execute a credential dumping program. And maybe the antivirus actually picks up the first dumping program and they're not successful there. But the threat actor will use a second one and maybe they are successful from the second tool. But having that first log of the credential number being first identified, that's critical because that might be your single thread that you need to pull and unravel to identify maybe a potential incident within the environment. So triage and analysis, I think this is clearly one of the most critical stages, and this is my favorite, is really the examination of event log data and confirming whether or not you have an incident. So there's three key areas. Endpoint analysis. So having forensic capabilities, the ability to analyze the device from a forensic perspective, capturing memory and RAM and ripping through that memory to identify any key artifacts of what occurred in the system. Memory is feature-rich with data that occurred on the endpoint, so commands that may have been executed aren't always logged on the endpoint or system itself, but they still may reside within memory. So it might be able to tell you the story of what that threat actor did while he was in the environment and where he went to next. Essentially what you're trying to do is build a timeline, and you're collecting all the artifacts associated with what occurred when that incident happened in the first place. So endpoint analysis is critical. So having forensic skills and an individual within the company that is constantly trained and kept up to date with those types of capabilities is highly recommended. On the binary analysis perspective, when you've identified an executable or a DLL file, something that seems malicious or suspicious, you're going to want to run some sort of dynamic analysis. You're going to want to execute it within an environment and see how it behaves. And then from a static analysis perspective, we're talking about reverse engineering the program. It's tough finding individuals with that capability, and it doesn't necessarily mean you need to hire a dedicated reverse engineer, but it's important to establish maybe relationships with other companies who do have talent in that area. So if you've established a trusted partnership with another company and they have reverse engineers on hand, maybe you have that free flowing of data back and forth where you're sharing some of your tools to maybe identify what does this binary actually do? What are the capabilities associated with that particular tool? Because that's important, because then maybe you can determine the true intent associated with that threat actor. And then enterprise hunting, it's important to have the ability to search across all of your devices, applying any indicators of compromise across your entire enterprise to identify where else a threat actor may have gone. So you're essentially leveraging the SIM for any traces that were left behind.